Good afternoon. I'm Mary Gregory from Brown Advisory, and with me today is Professor Dan Esty, who's the Hillhouse Professor of Environmental Law and Policy at Yale University. Dan, thank you so much for joining us for this talk this afternoon.
Pleasure to be with you.
Thank you. I should mention that Dan is also a proud member of the Brown Advisory Sustainable Investing Advisory Board, and we thank you for your participation and partnership with us in that.
It's a pleasure to be on that board, and I learn a lot from being with the Brown Advisory world.
Thank you. It's reciprocated. So recently, in fact today, you've spoken about the trends supporting a new 21st century framework for building a sustainable future. And you've called this and written about it as red lights to green lights. Can you explain what you mean by that, comparing last century to this century in terms of sustainability versus environmental policy?
Sure. In the 20th century, a lot of environmental protection centered on a set of red lights, of stop signs, of telling people what not to do. And it turns out that's helped us address some of the most severe problems of pollution and got companies focused on the need to reduce waste. But it didn't get us where we fully need to go to have a sustainable future. And that, I argue, requires not just telling people what not to do, but giving them green lights, telling them what they need to do, and creating incentives to solve problems. And in particular, things like a clean energy future aren't going to come about because companies were told what they can't do. They need to be told what society needs them to do. And so I think we need to shift from this narrower approach of the 20th century to a 21st century strategy for promoting sustainability that thinks a lot more about incentives for action, about innovation, and about really engaging companies as problem solvers, delivering what we need to have to get to a sustainable future.
Right, and you have actually talked about 10 trends that are really outside of sustainability, but are supporting the development of this type of framework that you're talking about. And we don't have time to go into all 10, but maybe if you could give us your top 3 trends that are most important to together supporting the sustainable future.
So I think it's easy in this current political moment that is fraught and full of trouble and seems very divided and polarized, and with some of the environmental trends looking quite worrisome, and certainly a number of speakers at the conference here have discussed these planetary boundaries that seem to be broken through. So there's a lot to worry about. But I want people to know that at the very same moment there's a lot of stuff going on that's actually pretty positive. It's helping get us to a sustainable future. For example, we are no longer thinking, as we did 20 or 30 years ago, that all the answers have to come from government. We have businesses that are providing solutions. We have investors that are trying to invest in ways that steer capital towards enterprises that are doing things in a more sustainable way. We've got a lot of things going on that are beyond the scope of government. And where government is involved, it's not just federal government. We have mayors and governors and a whole lot of people at the local and state level that are really showing the way forward. And I think that broader set of actors carrying the load is really quite critical. The other thing I think we see is that there are new ways to do regulation. The 20th century was all about these mandates, government saying what people had to do. In the 21st century, we have an opportunity, and I think it's beginning to emerge, to use a different strategy, a strategy of price signals, of making people pay for the harm they're causing, and by doing that, steer them towards reducing the harm, and frankly, spurring innovation so that others can help solve the problems and ensure that those that are currently paying for harm can pay less because they have new technologies, new approaches to doing the things they're doing.
And you mentioned technology. Could you talk a little bit in more detail about how important technology is to all of this and the role it can play?
Well, one of the things that seems absolutely clear is there's technology opportunities bursting forth in all kinds of places. Clean energy technologies, and then technologies that allow us to gauge performance better, track who the sustainability leaders are, signal to the market who we should be following. So all kinds of technologies that haven't been in place in the past. And frankly, many other aspects of society have been dramatically shifted in the last 10, 20 years toward new ways of doing business. And frankly, the environmental arena has been slow on the uptake of new technologies, particularly information technologies, but I think we start to see that coming into place. And things like blockchain, that again are being applied in other places, cryptocurrencies and so on, have a potential application in the sustainability arena in things like helping companies track their supply chains and make sure they're getting products from sustainable sources.
And of course, technology also helps with communication and transparency. and in fact forming a community that can work together. We're here at the SRI conference, which happens once a year, but there's things that people can do in their communities where they live. So do you have a view on, for instance, in your community at Yale University, the role that universities can play as communities in pushing this forward?
So I think there's lots of different communities, and it's exciting to see the socially responsible investing community becoming even broader as a sustainability community. And I do think all of us in different places have something to contribute. At Yale, we have an initiative on sustainable finance. So we're actually engaged in research, trying to understand what's working, what's not, and thinking about the questions that some of the people on the front lines trying to invest capital to steer toward a sustainable future need help and guidance on. So I think universities have a critical role to play, partly on research, and then partly in inspiring the next generation of leaders. Every day I think about the charge I have of getting my students interested in and then charging forward with some of the pathways that I think are critical, including understanding the important role of where the money for sustainability is going to come from. When I started out in my own career 35 years ago, no one told me that tracking the money was that important. And I spent decades thinking about how to advance the environment without really getting serious about where the money would come from. So inspiring students to think about that as a career opportunity, and at the very least something they need to pay attention to, I see as a pretty big role of universities.
That sounds like a lot of reasons to be optimistic. Thank you so much for your time today, Dan.
Really a pleasure.